Well, let's go ahead and kick this off. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Parker Fibelkorn, and I'm here with Carmen Daniels, and we're both members of the RSPH Alumni Association Board. And we're kicking off a new mid-career workshop series, which we're really excited about. It's a series of 4 virtual workshops designed to equip our alumni with actionable steps you can all take to jumpstart, transition, or update your current career portfolio. Um, so our hope is that after participating in either all 4 of these or one or more, that you'll have an action plan to really actualize your career goals in the new year. And I'd like to now introduce our speaker for today, who will be talking about illuminating leadership opportunities. So with us today, we have Rollins alum, David Bain. He's director of the Thurston County Public Health and Social Services Department. And he is going to share his non-traditional introduction to public health leadership, as well as lessons learned along the way. And I just want to mention that the session and the series will be recorded. So for all of you who would like to go back and listen later, feel free to type in questions in the chat or just ask questions along the way. We'd like to make this a dialogue. Thanks. So let me turn it over to you, David.
Thanks, Amy, and hello, everybody. It's morning here in Washington, so I'll say good morning to folks, even though I think a lot of you are East Coasters. And just thanks, Amy and Carmen, for inviting me to do this panel. It's always fun to be able to come back and do IMRI events, even if it's virtual. I sometimes am kind of, I don't know, in shock or in awe that I'm in this spot to even have this conversation with folks. So it's a good privilege for me to be able to do this. I guess for me, as I think about this idea of sort of my path and the implications for folks who are mid-career and thinking about their next steps, I had this thought in mind about this idea of these sort of dueling myths. One of them is this idea that like my career or any career is just a series of random chance, right? You just fall into a job, fall into the thing. The other is this myth of like fate, right? Like that was always going to be, I was always going to end up at this spot, right? My entire career had this inevitable end to it. And I think there's somewhere in the middle of a pathway, right? There's of course going to be some random things. And there's of course going to be a sense of steps you take to get you somewhere. But I think that the truth is, again, in the middle of that, along the way, there's a couple of, I think, kind of common themes that occurred in my career that got me to this point that were neither random nor inevitable. They were sort of active decisions in many ways that I made. And I kind of want to share with you the structure we had for today was to end with a couple of actionable steps. I'm going to actually lead with those steps and then kind of show how that took place throughout my career. So the 3 sort of actionable steps for you all that I want you to take away from as you're thinking about, your mid-career options and leadership growth, the following. So one is this theme of staying open. The second is a theme of always thinking about your story, updating it, shaping it. And the final one is the power of connection, which sounds like some really bad motivational speaker phrasing. So apologize for that, but it will make sense. So again, one more time. So staying open, thinking about your story constantly, and then the power of connection. When I think about my career, I've got to start at the beginning as a college graduate who just needed a job to get out of the house. I had some vague notions that I was going to find some opportunity where I would change the world, but I didn't really have a plan to do that. And the first job I happened to get was with the Georgia Senate Budget and Evaluation Office, which is a mouthful. Basically, I was a little budget geek. for the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the committee happened to have open, this is where some randomness comes up, was the Health Committee. And so I got started working on the state's Medicaid budget in Georgia, which to say it was complicated and complex is to put it lightly. And then, the path took me from the budget office to working for the executive branch in Georgia as a member of the Department of Health. That path took me all kinds of places within the Department of Health. Then it took me to Rollins. Then it took me to Washington State, where I worked for the State Department of Health. And then finally, it took me here to Thurston County, which is also in Washington, as a local health director. And so there's this fun path here that I went on that I could not have predicted as a kid trying to get a job at the state capitol almost 20 years ago. So, and I think about my career and I think about that pathway of sort of how I got there, that theme of staying open keeps coming to mind. So staying open, when I first interviewed for this job, that first job, I had zero experience whatsoever with budgets, with state capitol. I had a political science degree and a lot of hope and a good smile. That was pretty much what I brought to the table for that interview. But that perspective that I had of like not letting my resume, not letting my background sort of be a limiting factor, but instead figuring out how I could take that and use it for opportunities became honestly this like really consistent theme throughout each of my career stops. So staying open at that first stage was really about me being open to working in a field that I hadn't really thought I was going to work in. And then along the way, I had different options to work in different committees and explore different parts of the health system and from the budget and policy sphere, including at one point getting attached to the public health budget, which I actually didn't want. Like we were making shifts in our committee structures, and the director thought it would be a good idea for me to take on public health. I didn't really understand what public health was. It seemed a lot less sexy than working on the Medicaid budget, but I took it and legitimately like fell in love with the programs and the initiatives that were within the public health, and just started opening this sort of pathway of curiosity about what this thing was. Okay, so I had this first kind of big career split about 5 years into that role where I was contemplating just sort of staying in the budget world, becoming like an agency budget director at some point, maybe like that was the path I was going on. But then realized that like I actually loved talking to people more than I did spreadsheets, and realized the best parts of my job were actually engaging with policymakers and advocates on working through critical issues and hard decisions. And so when there was an opportunity for me to join the Department of Health, and Department of Public Health in Georgia, as a legislative deputy director, I jumped at it. Again, not a role that I had, not something I had direct experience on, but I had a background of learning how to translate complicated topics and ideas. I knew how to talk to legislators and advocates and agency folks. And the department was clear they wanted me specifically because I could translate. They said, you can speak earthling for people who don't understand like public health. And I think that it was not a guarantee. There was a risk jumping over there. Again, I want to highlight this idea that like it would have been really easy for me to sort of stay on this budget path because it was comfortable. It's what I got to know. I was good at it. And I think when I talk about this idea of staying open, part of me is really encouraging you guys to avoid the sunk cost fallacy. This idea that like, well, I put so much into a thing, so I have to keep going, sort of regardless of everything else, whether you've got better opportunities or if things aren't going well, you're invested, so let's just keep going. And I think that ability to avoid that fallacy like got me through so much of my career. And even when I've had opportunities where I've been in a role for 4, 5, 6 years and felt good about it, I think that continual sort of desire to stay open kept me moving, honestly, in ways that I would not have. I told you a little bit about the fact that I was really interested in like what it meant to think about your story. Again, when I thought about getting asked to do this job at DPH, my story was in my head originally was, well, I'm a kid with a few years of experience in budget world. But talking to folks who were in the public health arena, they said, no. Like, look at your experience, right? You've got experience working on these committees and work groups. You've done these really complicated projects. You've helped lead through really like complex appropriations things. Like these are all translatable. And I think that got my brain rolling on this idea that I am more than the sum of my resume, right? And more than the bullet points that I put on my literal job. And I got started, at age 24, 25, going, wait, I need to think about my life as a narrative. That narrative can shift and change depending on my experiences and what job I'm applying for. But again, I didn't want to let myself be stuck in a model that said, well, I'm only good at X or I only can show Y. And so I really want to sort of, again, that's a theme that's going to come up throughout my pathway here. I think for the role shift from the budget office to the Department of Public Health, honestly, staying open was one of it, but the power of connection was the biggest part. So I got asked to do this role because I'd made relationships within the department over the years. I was someone who was known to be trustworthy, a good listener, ask good questions. I got to know people personally at other departments. And so folks knew me in a way that was beyond just a professional way. And they knew that I was someone who'd be good to work with, someone who was going to be curious, someone who was going to be, not a pain to have as a coworker going forward. And I think, again, this is what every career development session ever will talk about is networking and power connection, but it is real, right? I mean, I think that like as much as, we're in a day and age where we've got all these options, Indeed.com and LinkedIn and places that we can look for jobs. And I use them as well. I'm not knocking them. There is the exponential power of a connection, right? Of knowing somebody, of knowing some bodies. It's just so much more powerful than just being kind of a random face in the midst of a lot of resumes. And so getting that job invitation to come work for DPH was my first if I can establish good relationships, there's no telling where I'll go next. And so that was really key for me in my early 20s. Okay, that's SBO. Love that time. Love understanding how the policies and processes worked, and honestly understanding I'd say the Taco Bell behind the scenes of how tacos are made in the state policy sphere was really important for me. Moving to DPH was my real intro into public health. Within a year, I got promoted to becoming the director for legislative affairs. Too many titles, and in that role, became the tip of the spear when it came to working through the department's legislative priorities, both on going on the offensive and finding ways for us to support the department, and on the defensive, keeping us from bad legislation that would, take us back down a road we didn't want to go down as public health. I will note here with DPH, I grew so much, as a public health employee in many ways. One of the ways that I will mention again is the idea of staying open was recognizing that my job was going to shift and change every year because public health shifted and changed every year. And I had to become nimble. I had to be able to roll with so many punches, whether it was Zika coming or Ebola or SARS or whatever it was. I had to be someone who wasn't stuck in a path where I had my pet projects and my pathway and I never moved. I had to always roll and shift and change and go with the flow. When it comes to my story, I began to realize that I wanted to have a story about policy and public health. So I began to shape this idea that regardless of where my career was going to go next, I knew that I wanted to be in this arena and that I wanted to be influencing policy in some ways. And so, in the back of my mind, as I'm doing my job year after year, I was trying to build on that story. I was trying to add pieces to that narrative of being someone who was experienced in public health policy. Within a couple of years, I had fully drank the Kool-Aid and decided I want to get my MPH. I got accepted into Rollins. And in some ways I was hesitant because I'm like, well, I've been working in public health for years. What am I going to learn at this point that I don't already know? And while it was true that I had a lot of experience, I think understanding some of the academic background, the basis for the work that I've been doing for years was obviously key. I don't need to sell you guys on the power of Rollins there, but the thing that I think was most important, to be honest, was actually connections I made during that time period. So being able to be at Rollins and getting to see all these folks who were also mid-career, thinking about how they got their advanced degree, despite being medical doctors, being researchers, being folks who had other graduate degrees, Some folks were directly out of undergrad. And I think for me, it just gave me this sort of extra sense of I think, excitement about my career and knowing that like this was going to be another jumping point for some future things for me. I didn't know what it was going to be quite yet, but I knew that to get somewhere else, I needed to get this MPH. And so again, this idea of me staying open and avoiding the sunk cost fallacy, I could have easily stayed in my role at DOH or sorry DPH without getting a degree and been just fine. It wasn't a requirement. Folks knew I was doing a good job. And there are people in that role and as peers who were in it for 10, 15, 20 years and were happy with it. I think for me, I wanted to keep my options open because I think I knew public health was a large place and I wasn't like satisfied with where I was going to be. So Rollins offered me not just 3 letters after my name, but also again a vision of going, wow, like look at all these other careers that are meshing with public health. I could do this too. Within a year of getting my degree, I was at a conference and got poached by Washington State DOH to come move from Atlanta to Olympia, Washington, to lead their public affairs team at DOH, which would have been kind of a shift. Again, I was someone working in policy, legislative affairs. This role was going to focus more on communications, health equity, health education, things that I had experience with on the tangent, but not directly. And again, look at the themes again of like, I was open to this. I was open to something that was a little different. I knew that I had a story and a narrative that while I didn't have the direct bullet points for the resume, I had enough of a story that folks looked at it and said, no, this makes sense. We can see you in this role based on your experience both in the budget office and at DPH. And then finally, the power of connection, I went to a lot of conferences in my time at DPH, did a lot of traveling. And part of that was because I was always trying to grow and get better at my craft. The other part of it was actually trying to meet people. And I mean, I literally got this job because I went to a conference out of state and someone happened to see my biography and thought this guy looks interesting. That's literally how I got offered the opportunity to apply for a job at DOH. And so I would say, I would combine with this story, I would combine the staying open with the power of connection here. I think as you're thinking about your future, I think it's okay not to have a full-fledged plan and going ahead, but I think like looking for opportunities where you can get those connections, where you can really leverage them will be really key going forward. Okay, so I get to Washington State and I have one whole year where I'm learning this job and I'm tasked with reorganizing basically a 90-person team that was decentralized to become a centralized functioning team that had communications and equity and education all put together. 1 year. The next year, COVID hits. And I have to put to the test this 1 year working like in an extreme way of leading the state's efforts when it came to COVID communications. And that was an experience that in some ways scarred me and my team forever. But in other ways was just an incredible opportunity. I could have stayed in the sidelines. I was a director. I could have just sent my team off to the front line, stayed home, and sort of been happy. I actually actively volunteered to get put into the incident command structure, the emergency response part of the team, because I felt like, number one, like there was no way I was going to miss this pandemic and being on the front lines. And so I was staying open to the possibility that like I could contribute something to this cause. And the second was I kept thinking of my narrative again in my story and thinking about I can't have my story be with me on the sidelines. There's just no way. Like I have to be involved in this way. And so I spent a good probably 9 months while most of my family and friends were locked down. I was traveling to and from the state lab and to and from our National Guard post doing COVID work for communications. And I could spend a whole session just on lessons learned there. But I think the key part for me was the fact that I continue to think about the fact that my career needed to not just move, but have purpose. And this was something that kept me going throughout COVID. How did I get from there to local health department? I think this is where the story gets even more interesting to me because, again, there's things that I made active decisions on, and there's things that just sort of happened to you. So in the midst of COVID, we also had a transition of leadership within the department, had a whole new leadership team, a new Secretary of Health, who had different ideas for how the department was going to look and run. And I'll be honest, folks didn't love the direction around the department always about where things were going. And my position, I was asked to consider doing something different in the department, not a step down, but like considering like a completely new division. He wanted me to start a brand new office related to external partnerships. And I had an option, right? I had a pathway where I could have dug my heels in and said, no, I'm comfortable where I am. I'm good at what I do. Look what I did in COVID, right? We had a great success. But again, I think I kept the flexibility open, going, wait a second, what an opportunity this is for me to do something that's both different, but also builds on lots of my past experiences in my last couple of jobs. And so in this role, I opened up a partnership office for DOH for the first time, where we were supposed to be doing things like liaising with local health jurisdictions, private partners, education partners, and we got it off the ground in the midst of our vaccine rollout and other things going on, and had a successful rollout my first year there. The connections that I made during that year and a half were incredible with local health. They got to see me during a time that was really tough. COVID was tough on local health. There was tensions between the departments and locals, but folks began to see me as someone who was trusted and someone who could communicate with them, someone who understood their world. And so, again, unexpectedly, right? 2 years after that, I get asked to apply for a job at Thurston County Local Health, based in no small part on the fact that I'd spent so much time and energy working with locals. And again, I had this moment, this sort of fork in the road of going, do I want to stay in the state? This is what I've known now for over almost 2 decades. I've been a state employee. It's what I've known. And decided again that like my career, my pathway needed to be broader than just like my limited vision of what I've been doing. And took another risk, another jump, and got the role in December of 2022 as health director. So thanks for being with me on this journey here. The point is, this job that I got now is a role that takes into account, honestly, all of my previous jobs. And I look at the things I have to do as a health director. I have to be good with budget. I have to be active in policy. I have to be working with legislators. I have to work with the state. I have to think about what it means to have a good communications policy and good communications programming, health education, health equity. In many ways, my career led to this point. But as I've shown you, like none of that was completely random, right? And none of it was inevitable. They were all choices along the way. I think my encouragement for you all is as you're thinking about your pathway, both how you got to where you are today and where you want to go, I think is to keep an open mind. Like I didn't envision myself becoming a local health director, even though this is an incredible job and it looks like the pathway I took was like the most logical way to get there. It wasn't. It was definitely something that, again, I had to continue to sort of question and ask and think about, is this what I want to do along the way? I want to wrap up in a couple minutes because I really want to spend time getting questions and questions from you all and hopefully giving some answers. But again, I want to sort of key in a little bit on those three themes in kind of isolation for a minute, and then maybe use that as a segue for questions at this point. So when I think about this idea of staying open and avoiding that sunk cost fallacy, I think what I've also been saying, maybe not as like explicitly, is this idea of like being willing to take calculated risks. I don't think that like any of us are going to get far in our careers if we, aren't willing to take that risk. Not knowing like what the end result's going to be, not knowing if we have the right chops for it, not knowing where it's going to lead us. I think that willingness to do that is always going to be our launching pad for success at the end of the day. I was thinking about when I got that job opportunity for Washington at that conference, I was literally willing to travel metaphorically and both literally and metaphorically to Washington State. It wasn't just that I was ready to leave Georgia. I love Georgia, but I think I had to have a mentality that said, I'm ready for the next thing. And so I think my encouragement to you guys is to be ready for the next thing. I think is to put yourself in a spot where you are open to that random conversation, that random job that pops up, that opportunity for you to do something that's different. And I know that, again, this is really touchy feely, but I think so much of our work life still is built on our emotions, right? It's built on our gut and our instincts and our feelings. And I will say, like, trust your instincts. You got this far for a reason. And so I think that this idea of staying open in large part is about your trusting your gut and your instincts, and being open both metaphorically and literally to travel and to move. The concept of contemplating your story and thinking about your resume, I'm not here to sort of give you, resume tips per se. But I do think as someone who now has hired, I mean, probably 50, 60 people over my career at this point to different levels, I know what I'm looking for isn't just someone who can show me a straight line from undergrad to this position they're looking for. I want to see experience. I want to see that you can show me that, like, you took a job. Honestly, you could have worked in retail, but if you can sell me on what you did in retail as it relates to communication or education, I'll listen to you, right? Like, I think there's a part of us that I think in a world where we're oversaturated with advanced degrees and really competitiveness, I think it's okay for us to think beyond our kind of normal like pathway when it comes to our experience. And part of that has to come with you taking the time to go, what is my story? What does it look like? And how is it bigger than just the bullet points in my resume? And again, a shout out to Rollins, like being able to be in a program that had so many different careers and it was encouraged, right, to come from different backgrounds, to have different non-traditional experiences, and to be able to have a cohort of people who were all thinking about their next steps was so valuable. So I'm going to segue again to my last point about connection. I think if nothing else, I think look at your network. Your network isn't just this sort of static, who's in my LinkedIn list that you have. I think it's your friendships, it's your old classmates, it's professors, it's your 2 jobs ago that boss you had who really like give you good advice. I think it's really critical for you to think beyond just a small network and think about your entire lifespan and what you can get from that connection. I think that I would not be here without mentoring along the way. So my network wasn't just about finding someone who had access to a job. That network was also people who could say, go with your gut. Someone who could say, oh no, I know you don't think you could apply for that job, but I actually think that you're capable of doing this job. Or I've hired someone with similar experience before. It's okay. And it doesn't matter to me whether that person, I've had mentors who were younger than me. I've had mentors who had jobs that were, 5 levels up from me. I just think that like it is so critical for you to keep yourself in a spot where you're constantly staying curious, constantly asking questions and recognizing that like you've got the connections you need at this point. And I think that like it is easy for us to feel discouraged in a competitive job market, to feel discouraged if your resume doesn't look quite like you want it to. But I think you've got people, you've got connection that you can make. You need to leverage those where you can. Okay, I will take a breath now and sort of. I don't know how you want to structure this, Amy or Carmen, but give folks a chance to kind of reflect and have questions.
David, this was just phenomenal. You provided so many little pearls of wisdom and nuggets of inspiration for all of us, and especially those of us that are in our mid-career and maybe in a rut or looking to make a change. And, just thinking about so many of these concepts that you raised with like the sunk cost fallacy and how we are all more than the sum of our resumes. And, I think like just being willing to take those calculated risks when those opportunities arise. And, I do have a question just to kick it off, and I'd love for others to either write in the chat or raise their hands. But, as you're making these life decisions, and, taking each of these calculated risks, like what are the factors that you are taking into consideration? Like what if your current work environment is pleasant and you enjoy going to work every day and you enjoy your colleagues and you're satisfied, with the work that you're doing? How in your career trajectory did you decide to take the leap and try something new when you were comfortable and happy with, the current position you are in? I think sometimes, especially as you get in mid-career and there's all these other life responsibilities and whatnot, it is really hard to make a big shift if things aren't imploding, in your current position. So I just would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think part of it is we talked about creating a story, and part of me is sort of thinking, always thinking about like, where do I want my story to go next? Um, and is staying here gonna allow my story to grow, my path to grow, or is it gonna sort of stay in this same pathway? And then to be clear, there's nothing wrong, I think, with being comfortable in a role and in a job. And to your point, Amy, there's been times in my life where it made the most sense to sort of stay pat, for a few years to work out other things. But I think after taking my first, risk or two, it sort of provides this validation that says, wait a second, like this was worth it. Like I think this reminder to me that like once I take one risk and I learn from it, it inspires you to take the next risk. And my like the part of my brain that says, hey, you're comfortable can be faced with, yes, but you wouldn't have been here if you hadn't risked it the last time, right? And there's a potential for the next opportunity you have to be even more sort of meaningful for you. And so I think part of that is that it's sort of chicken and egg, but it's a reminder of myself, like you got here, you took risks. Where else could you be if you that next risk? And then I think the other part of it for me, honestly, again, this is really, it feels almost woo woo, but like there is a gut check for yourself where I think we spend so much of our life in our work, right? Like if you do the math about how many hours during any given day and week you spend in your job, nowhere else, just your job, there's a point where I'm like, I want my job to feel like it's like any relationship that it's moving forward, that I'm benefiting, that I'm growing. And I think to me, that mark for me is when I feel stagnant. Um, um, as part of my DPH career path, I had an opportunity to be promoted from the legislative director, which is a great job. And for most people, that is a career. They're a legislative director. And I got to be the deputy chief of staff for the department, where I still kept that responsibility, but had other things too underneath my responsibility. And it was really tempting to um, keep that leads position to myself. I could easily have been the person at the Capitol still and done that work. And I was more than happy to delegate that role out to somebody else because I felt myself like feeling stagnant. I'd done that role for 5, 6 years, and I was objectively good at it. We were successful. We passed a lot of good bills. But I felt myself feeling like, oh, I'm doing the same thing again. I'm there. I'm not moving forward. And so, I think it took me sort of letting that go and exploring other areas of management and growth that honestly got me here and not stuck in that same pathway. So I think it was that gut check of like, are you really satisfied? Are you really growing? I think that was the marker for me. So it was the past calculated risk being successful or at least being good lessons, and then the gut check of like, am I truly growing? Was the two factors that I would say continually come up for me.
That is such great words of wisdom and, so helpful, I think, for many of us here listening to your story. Does anyone have a question from the audience that you'd like to jump in? Carmen?
I thought you did an excellent job. I love hearing your story over and over again. I could hear it so many times. It's very inspiring. One of the things that you just mentioned about when is it time to, move on to another position and taking that gut check, sometimes it made me think about thinking of other people, right? Creating space and opportunities for others as they're moving and transitioning their career. And the same thing has happened for you as you transition and move to careers. Someone else that said, okay, my time here is done. I've done what I've set out to do. Now it's time for me to transition on as well. And it's a cycle that we all go
Yes,
through, and it's so
yes,
like, it just gave me chills in thinking about it because I've been in there, I've seen you in there in those spaces. And it's very valuable and just inspiring to hear, thinking about that cycle. And then the only other thing, and I say we have a question, which is great. I loved the concept of, telling your story and really elaborating and getting into the details of your story and who you are. And sometimes I've heard this as like, what's your superpower? And how do you describe your superpower through the story and transitions through your career? So I loved that that was one of your kind of action items. And then lastly, around connections and connecting. Networking can go one of two ways. It can have a very negative connotation, and it can be very challenging, even going forth and, seeking out mentorship. I have a question about mentoring. I'm put it into the chat because I want to get to questions from those that are within the audience. But just in thinking about mentorship, that's something that I do want to bring back up and navigating that space. But it looks like Nicole has a question. And yeah, thank you for sharing. So much of what you said resonates for me, being open and making connections. Could you share some more about growing and maintaining your professional network? So Nicole may have my question already answered. So we'll see, how you respond to that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Carmen, for the kind words. For those who don't know, Carmen also has gotten a window into my career from like some of the early days. So it's actually fun to be able to tell that story and know that you got to see some of it, up close and personal. Um, okay, growing and maintaining professional network. Yeah, I'm gonna be clear, like there is no obviously like magic bullet, right? That or one pathway to this. For me, I think I alluded to this about getting that job opportunity from Washington. This is kind of serious. I think that your ability to be able to attend um, workshops and conferences, whether they are in state or out of state, especially when they're in person, and that ability to just meet folks in your field, meeting folks who are leaders in their field. I mean, I have built genuine friendships from folks that I met at out of state conferences and out of state connections. So I think looking for opportunities to do that, whether it's on your own dime or through your office. I know one of the things I'm grateful for about my time at DPH and at DOH was both jobs encouraged me to go out. It benefited them to be able to for me to get experience and to tell the story of what we were doing in Georgia, Washington, but it benefited me, I think, to be able to to meet folks and to experience other people's wisdom and connections there. So I would say taking the chance, taking the opportunity to go out and travel and to put yourself out there is really key. Um, the other thing that I'm thinking about when it comes to that network, and honestly, is thinking through in your career, in your kind of current career path, whether it's someone in another department, um, someone that you have seen speak at an event, like don't be shy about reaching out. Like you'll be surprised, I think, at how many people are willing to kind of just take time to talk and share their experience if you do that work of reaching out, making that connection. And this is where, I'll plug in LinkedIn, right? I mean, I think that ability to see your kind of network tree and to see that you're, 2 or 3 degrees away from someone that, you look up to, I think is really key. And not being shy about that connection, their connection. I think that it's funny, like we are more online now than we ever have been, but I think that means that our ability to personally connect is that much more meaningful because that it is how you stand out in the crowd, and it is so much more meaningful to be able to meet someone for whether it's a virtual coffee or a real one versus just being another name in a list of names. So I think for me, it was taking opportunities to travel to different places where I could meet new folks, and then thinking about the extensions of my current connections and not being shy about that.
That's super helpful. Thank you. So I just threw another question in the chat, and I really loved how you talked about thinking about your story, right? Like as each of us lives our lives, we're creating our own legacy and we're making decisions that have a snowball effect. And, at the end of our lives, like you can look back and say, I wish I had gone this direction, or I'm super happy with the path that I took. And I just, I think this concept might be new to some people, or, like everyone knows about like living life and, doing your thing. But I don't know that a lot of people consciously like think about like the whole picture, right? And the story that you want to tell at each point in time in life. And, you know, it can feel overwhelming, right? Like with each of these decisions, like how do you make a decision if that might take your story down, you know, one path versus another. And so I just thought if you could talk about the process, like as these opportunities come your way, how you break it down, you know, in your own story and what that looks like. So if someone is new to this concept of, you know, creating their own story and thinking about their story, I mean, we're all creating a story, whether we realize it or not,
Yep.
but I don't think everyone, you know, does that purposefully, right? They just let life happen. So if you want to be more conscientious about, you know, really making decisions that align with your end values and goals, like what does that process look like?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And it's something that like you're making me want to like lay this out graphically at some point, right? Or visualize this. I think maybe there's at least two different starting points for me, and it can be done. So I think you can either start with yourself and taking time with yourself to reflect, or with somebody else. And I think either way will work here. I've done both for myself and for others. I'll talk about other people for a minute, which is I think maybe an easier one, which is sort of it's great to have someone to sit down with and just start talking through. I think what are the things that you know when you look at back on your career so far, what are the common themes you're seeing? Um, what are the things that attracted you to certain jobs? What are the things that you felt you were most successful about? And then it's almost like collecting those things and like sorting them out. And you're going, okay, in this, what am I seeing here, right? And so for me, when I do that breakdown of like the roles that I had and the things that I did, there's these themes of, um, you know, someone who at a really basic level like loves engaging with people. That sounds really basic, but like I also could have not loved engaging with people, right? And I mean that was one of those first career breaks I made was to go the budget director route or not. Was I decided no, I love people actually, and I love engaging with people, and it became a reason for me to like not close the door, but to shift my thinking to other kind of roles. So I think breaking down your own past experiences, whether it was, like I said, whether it's retail or academia, whatever, what were the themes that like stayed with you? And then start going, what is it saying about my story? Now, that doesn't mean you're stuck there. It just gives you a good sense of like what you've been doing, even subconsciously in some ways, right? And I think once you've got that collection together of like, okay, here's been the themes of my career so far. Here's been the ways that I've shown up successfully or not successfully. I think you put that on one, you put that and hold it in one hand. The other hand, you go, what are the things that I care about? What are the things I'm interested in at a high level? And so for me, I was like, oh, I actually care about policy at a high level. That's a really broad word. And it didn't give me like a direct career path, but it like gave me a parameter go, start looking for things in this arena over here. Right. And so I started thinking about what is the marriage between the collection of skills that I've developed, the experience I have, and this whole policy world thing, and then started drawing these lines of going, oh, there is a connection here. And part of that connection comes from talking to other people who can sort of see it better than you can, right? It's like someone can see you better than you see yourself in many ways. And I think having that moment of reflection with someone where you say, here's my resume, here's my experiences, and here's where I want to go. And then like having that back and forth dialogue of like saying to someone, does this translate? Does this make sense? Do you think I can? And I think that's for me, it's been a game changer being able to do that. And also being able to be the person who's listening and going, no, I see this connection. Actually, I see this thing that you're doing. And so I think that would be a starting point for me. I mean, I can go all day about this, but I think the starting point to me is doing a real like an inventory of like where you've been, what was successful, regardless of the job, just what was successful about those pieces, and then making a decision: do I want to keep using those skills? And if I do, okay, where, right? And so I think that's kind of my advice there. But yeah, I could go all day about this one. Thanks for that question.
Great, thank you.
No, That was really good, Amy. It's so funny because I am an MPH, like public health skills lover, and I feel like I integrate them into everything in my life. And when you were talking about a graphic, the first thing I thought about was a logic model. And then I thought about
Yes.
I thought about inputs being our values are and
Yeah.
so what are your personal values and creating your story through your values and what you've required across different careers and the things that you really loved, and those are your inputs. Then you start talking about the activities. So no, that
We
was really great. Thank you.
That was great. We do have a question. We have someone with their hand raised, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hi. This was great. Thank you so much, David, for giving all that insight and information. Um, Carmen, you started talking about the logic model, and it brought me back to those when
Yeah,
called
me
those.
too.
But my comment and question is, I'm a new alumni, and I came into this space not really, my career path was not really public health, although prior I did a lot of work internationally with education and helping girls go to school and things like that. So I thought going into the path of MPH would be really great. I do, I agree with, using your network because I use somebody from my past experience to help me get my APE project done, doing some cool things in Ivory Coast. So for me, I worked up really hard to get where I'm at. And now it's like, okay, I'm new in this space. How am I going to transfer? And I do have, I agree, there's a lot of transferable skills. I think it's just a little scary to know you've, gotten to a certain level in your career. I find, I'm now a director of over ward closeout and research administration here at Emory. And so I'm trying to think, okay, how do I get into that space now? My thought process, and correct me if I'm wrong, or I'm open to all kinds of advice, but I was thinking that maybe I could volunteer on some sort of public health. I can go to conferences on my own, but I'm looking for maybe sitting on some sort of board or something that could help me get, some more exposure and then, have that on my resume so I don't have to start at the very bottom. I don't know. That was my thought process, but I just want to hear, what places I could go to do that. Is that the right way of thinking? I'm not afraid to make a move. I just don't want to go all the way back down.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel that. No, that makes sense. Um, I think the idea about sort of like finding ways for engagement that isn't necessarily paid engagement, not internships, but I mean this idea of like joining board. I think that's actually really a really good idea. I will tell you that in public health across the country, there is never a lack of need for folks to be joining advisory councils, boards, and it isn't just going to be within, say, a department. I mean, whether it's at a local municipal level, there could be a subgroup for a planning commission. I know for us, the county, we have a county health board where we've got both elected officials, but also just private citizens, and we just nominated or elected our, I think, three new members, and two of the three have MPHs, and they just cared about public health and wanted to join up in this board, and they're going to have an opportunity to work with me in a really interesting capacity, right? They're not working for the department, but they're providing good insight and input. They get to like have a say in the policies that I'm putting forward. But I think it's a really good idea to let's seek out opportunities where you can provide input, and where you can really build that network there and that experience, because that will go along. Like being able to show on your resume that you were part of this community board or this board of advisory board for health. Like I think it's a really big deal. So I think that pathway for you is a really smart one, and I agree with you. I think there are going to be times where I think there's opportunities that might be maybe a slight step down for salary that but provide a bigger opportunity. But I think at a certain point in your career, you can't afford to do a complete reset, right? Where you're like, now I'm entry level again. So I totally understand that, which goes back to this idea of like leveraging your experience. and saying, even if it's not direct, I have experience, right? And so I'm not gonna accept this idea that like, oh, you have to start over again. No, 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 no. My experience got me to this point, and it'll get me to this next point too. But yeah, thanks for the question. I agree with your idea is a really good one.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm looking for organizations or anything. If you guys have anything, I'd love to capitalize on that if you have anything. Thanks again.
That's great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments that you'd like to bring up to David?
Well,
I think Carmen asked a good question about mentorship, and I didn't want to
right.
neglect that one.
Yeah, that can be challenging. So it was really around insights on seeking and asking for mentorship, and how do you prepare for like cultivating this type of relationship?
Yeah, it's funny. I've got someone who asked me to be their mentor about 2 years ago, um, and they were new to the department. They're new to public health, but not new to a career. They've been working for years in an advocacy space, um, and we're trying to understand the world they were joining in public health at the department. And so they literally asked someone they were friends with in the department, like, who should I go to be a mentor? And someone like threw my name out there for some reason. And so they literally just like emailed me. They're like, you don't know me. I just started, here's my background. I heard, I've heard a little about your background, and would you be willing to just like have a quick chat with me, And then we chatted, and she told me a little bit about kind of what her goals were, what she was looking for. And I was like, well, I can't promise that I'm gonna have, all these pearls of wisdom and direct answers, but yeah, I think what you're looking for is something that I can like give you some insights or give you my experience, and we can work from there. But I think honestly, it doesn't. I know it's not a guarantee, but I think even just that boldness of just like saying, hey, you're someone who I think has experience or has something that I'm looking for. I think most people don't get those kind of invitations. Like, it's not a normal invitation to get. And so I think being willing to do that will surprise people. But I think most people would be willing to do that. I think it helps with you as the person seeking it out. Have in mind what you're looking for, right? Sort of a vague sense of mentorship isn't going to be useful versus you going, these are the kind of things that I'm really hoping to like think about. It doesn't mean that you have to have like a 10-page plan, but I think that idea of like some key things, because it helps the person who's the mentor go, oh, okay, this is doable, right? Like, this is something we could check in once a month, or we can do whatever. Like, it just gives them a sense of like what their engagement looks like. So I think that's really helpful. But I really liked, so it's my friend Sharmi who is my mentee. Like, she asked around, like she actually asked other people, like, this is the kind of things I'm looking for. Do you have anybody in the department you think might be good at this and open? So I'd say that is a good way to start too, honestly, is to like literally like ask other folks like who would be a good suggestion. And then I think the other element I would add quickly is the kind of unofficial mentorship too. I think recognizing there are mentorship dynamics in place with the right peer or right boss that may not be official, but that I think you look at it and go, oh, wait a second, this is something I do trust, and someone who does provide good insight, and just recognizing that you might already have a mentory person in your life, and then I think maybe making that more formal. I mean, like going to them and saying, hey, I've always relied on you and always talked to you. Like, is it okay if we like set up a dedicated, time or whatever, we can talk specifically about like my career? I think it's a great suggestion.
There have been some great comments that have come in through the chat. Like Amy Schlotthauer said, our state public health association is a mentorship program where they pair early and mid to late career people. And she said it might be available in other states as well as through the Public Health Association or other professional memberships. Carmen raised that Emory, our career services has a public health employment connection. And then Sarah said it's helpful to figure out if what you need is a coach or a mentor, because they do serve different purposes. And then I just wanted to raise Nicole's point where she said, I think recognizing your non-traditional public health experience can be an asset, which is really important. For example, she said, we're frequently struggling to find public health folks with project management experience, but it's really needed. So a lot of good nuggets of information in the chat. So I know we're closing in on our final few minutes. Did you have any final closing thoughts for us before Carmen and I, she's going to drop a link into the next session. But I just wanted to give you one more opportunity, David, if there's any like final message you want us to walk away with.
Well, I just again want to say thank you for the chance to do this session with you all, and I love the questions and I love the insight from folks. I think that Nicole's point about the value of having a non-traditional background. So at this point in my career, it looks like I have a public health background, but actually that's not how I see my background. Like I actually still feel like someone who is was an outsider coming in the public health world, right? I mean, I had, gosh, like 7 years of doing other things that weren't within the public health sphere. I didn't have my MPH until, gosh, probably 11 years after I graduated from undergrad. Like I don't feel myself as like a public health insider. And I think that's been a huge value add for all the roles that I've had, is having other experience. And I'm so excited that we are in a time where public health as an academic discipline has grown, and that you've got both undergrad and grad and doctorate programs. I will support those right to the end of the earth. But I think that reminder that like public health, more than almost any other field, is so welcoming of your experiences, because that's what makes this field so valuable, because public health is so all encompassing, because public health is like, you have the health and all things concept. It means that like you bringing in your experiences like is a value and not a setback. It's not a drawback for you as a future candidate. And again, I can't tell you the number of people that I've hired or seen hired in all of my jobs that came from left field, right? And they got into public health and were superstars, like genuine superstars. Is so encouraging, and I want y'all to walk away with that too. Whether you've got that background of direct public health experience, or this is a switch for you getting the MPH, your experience is valuable. Tell your story, right, in a way that like can line up with what you want to do next. Continue to stay open to what you're going to experience, and again, like that idea of connection, whether it's mentoring or coaching or having someone who can sort of truth talk to you about, hey, it's okay to make that next step, I think is so key. So I just wanted to say thanks and really appreciate, what a great group. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much. What a phenomenal session. I feel motivated and inspired now to like reassess everything, and your bravery and your willingness to take risks and to share your stories was really appreciated by all of us. And for all of you who were in attendance today, Carmen did drop the link to the next workshop in our speaker series, our mid-career workshop session, which is February 28th, again at noon Eastern time. And that one will be exploring entrepreneurship in public health. So it'll be a little different of a take than our topic today. So we hope that you can all join us then. And in the meantime, just think about the 3 action items that David raised today about staying open, always thinking about your story, and the power of connection. So thank you all. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.